Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is steer. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear steer used is to mean to guide or control the movement of a vehicle, a vessel, think ship or boat, or even an aircraft here. So with this particular definition, not only we're controlling the movement, maybe we're having that vehicle, vessel, or aircraft move in a particular direction. A second way you might hear steer used is to mean to be guided in a specified direction. So here we might be talking about having a particular person move into a particular space or area, right? And if you're guiding them, then you are steering them. A third way you might hear steer used is to mean to follow a course in some particular direction. So sometimes on a trip or some type of journey, you might see this verb used to describe sort of the course and direction that a group or a person took. A fourth way to use the verb steer is to mean to guide the movement or course of someone or something. So here, I'd like to think with this fourth definition in terms of advice, right? So I have had so many wonderful teachers in the past, and they have steered me into different opportunities or encouraged me to take other classes, try new things, right? So they have guided my development really as a professional. You should know that steer is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, all you need to do is add ing to form steering. The past tense and participle forms of this verb are made by adding ed. Our base verb, steer, ends in a voiced R sound. So our past tense ending is going to make a D sound, but we're not adding an extra syllable here. So it should sound like this: steered, steered. Now, we do have a number of phrasal verbs to look at. The first one we're going to look at, steer away from, can be used in a variety of different ways. We're going to look at 4 different meanings. So the first could be to guide or aim a vehicle in a direction that is away from something else. An example of this: imagine being in a car, you see a deer, and you say to the driver, steer away from the deer, right? You want to aim the vehicle so that you don't run into or make contact with the deer. A second way to use steer away from is to mean to avoid interacting with someone, right? So think of your body like a car or a vehicle, right? And you're going to go in a direction away from someone. An example of this: I always steer away from her before 11 a.m. She isn't a morning person, right? So here someone is suggesting, right? I do not try and interact with or speak with this person because maybe they're just a little grumpy or unpleasant in the morning. A third way to use steer away from is to mean to avoid pursuing, utilizing, or making a commitment to something. An example of this might be: we should steer away from large gatherings during this wave of COVID-19. So unfortunately, cases are rising again in the United States. So we need to avoid these types of large gatherings where we don't know people's vaccination status, where they're unmasked, etc., just for our own safety. A fourth way we can use steer away from is to mean to try and convince or persuade someone to avoid something. An example of this: he has been steering us away from eating meat. Right? So this particular person is maybe trying to convince others, either for their health or for the sake of the environment, right? Let's avoid eating meat. Now, another phrasal verb you might hear is steer into, and this can have a couple different meanings. The first, again, now we're going to guide or aim that vehicle into a particular place. An example of this, the captain steered the boat into the channel, right? So guided the boat in this particular direction. A second way we can use steer into is to describe guiding, directing, or leading someone into a particular situation. An example of this, my 6th grade teacher steered me into better nutrition. This is a true statement for me. I had a teacher who was very committed to health. She had us, her students, doing yoga. She talked about eating a balanced diet. She brought in things to make fruit juice and kind of get us excited about healthier food. Now let's continue using our verb of the day, steer. And today we're going to practice giving advice. And there are several different ways we can do this. We can do it with the modal should. And that's what we'll look at first. This is probably the most common way you're going to hear people give advice, and you yourself can also use it to give advice. So our structure in the affirmative is going to be pretty simple. We're going to start with a subject, then we're going to have should, and then our base verb. An example here, you should carefully steer the car into the garage, right? So this is our direct a vehicle or aim a vehicle into a particular place. Now, you can also give negative advice, telling someone it's not a good idea to do something. For that, again, our structure, subject, should not, or the contraction shouldn't, and then the base verb. Here's another example. He shouldn't steer the ship into the rough waters, right? That's a bad idea, right? We don't want to be an accident or for the boat to capsize, turn over. Finally, we can also ask people for advice. And we can do that through yes or no questions, right? So we can start with should, then our subject, then our base verb. An example of this, should we steer our focus to another topic? So this is that idea of kind of changing course, changing the direction of a conversation. A second way to give advice is through the phrase ought to and the base verb. And that's going to be our structure no matter what our subject is. You can see that in the example. Shoppers ought to steer clear of untrusty websites. And I'm going to introduce a phrase here that, again, is pretty common. This idea of steer clear is another way to say stay away from. Okay? So here, right, we don't want shoppers to use untrustworthy websites that might lead to them having their money stolen and not getting a particular item. Now, if you listen to many people use this phrase, ought to is kind of blended into one word. And I've made a note so you can, maybe it'll help with your pronunciation, or again, not that you have to pronounce it this way, but just if you're listening, you can understand what others are saying. Ought to frequently sounds like oughta, right? So if I was in conversation with friends, I would likely hear one of them say, shoppers ought to steer clear of untrustworthy websites. So it can sound a little different, but again, meaning is the same. And you're going to notice we don't use oughta in the negative, and we don't use it for yes or no questions. Okay. Our third way to give advice is to use had, better, and then our base verb. And this is in the affirmative, right? And when we use this, had, better, and our base verb, it's considered to be very strong advice. And many times we are suggesting that there will be consequences if we do not take this advice, or something bad will happen. An example sentence here, investors had better steer clear of this stock. So again, steer clear, stay away from something. Here, the consequence might be they'll lose money. This investment will become worthless, right? So there are many people who give advice about what to invest in or how to invest in things. And sometimes, again, they have this very strongly worded advice of like, don't do this, there will be consequences. You'll notice here we can use a negative form. So our negative form here is going to be had, better, not, and then our base verb. Here's another example. We had better not steer away from saving money for too long. So again, you might hear steer used in connection to financial advice. It's that idea of sort of following a particular plan, a particular course, if you will. But here, someone is suggesting maybe for a short while we need to direct money to some bills or some other thing. However, we had better not, I should say, we had better not stay away from saving for too long, or that could create problems for the future. Now, let's spend just a little time looking at some words and phrases. The first word we're going to look at is the noun form of our verb of the day. So, same spelling, same pronunciation. Steer as a noun can have a couple different meanings. One could be a piece of advice or an information, a piece of information connected to the development of some situation. Now, I don't hear this noun used a great deal. As I looked for examples of it, it seemed maybe a little more common in the UK in British English versus American English, but still good to be aware. An example of this might be the governor didn't give a clear steer as to whether he would sign the legislation. So he did not give information. He didn't give an update. Might be another way to sort of express this particular idea. A second way you'll hear the noun steer used is in connection to male cows. And these are generally male cows that aren't being used to breed more cows. They are being bred to eventually become beef, become food for people. So an example of this noun in a sentence might be, did the cowhand rope the steer? And I've included a picture on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. I know sometimes that makes it much easier than any explanation I can offer. The next related word that I think is quite common is the steering wheel. Right? So if you're a driver, this is something you see often or every time you're in the car, right? So this is the wheel that a driver is going to rotate, right, to make the car go to the left or to the right, or keep it going straight as it goes forward or back. So an example here, keep both hands on the steering wheel. Right? So here's an imperative. This is a command, little different than advice, right? Where we're telling someone it's a good idea to do something, right? So parents, as they teach their children to drive, might give this particular command, right? Keep both hands on that steering wheel. Don't be looking at your cell phone or trying to text or do something else like that. The last phrase I have on your screen, I've introduced a bit already. It is that idea of steering clear of something. So again, this means to avoid or stay away from either a person or some object or thing. An example of this, steer clear of unmasked people who are coughing. Again, this is another imperative usage here, and probably some good advice, a good piece of wisdom here. If you don't know them and you don't know how they're feeling, or if they've been vaccinated, any of those things, a good idea to stay away as we go through yet another wave of COVID-19. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.